Please welcome our speaker, Sais Mati Jah, Executive Director at the Center for Research and Policy Developments in the Gambia. Elio Sanchez, former Secretary General of the Government in Cabo Verde. Musa Touré, Chancellor at Gao University. Stevens Mokalapa, former Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs in South Africa. And before giving the floor to our chair, allow us to introduce the session. As we move through 2024, the political landscape across Africa's subregions is marked by a paradox. On the one hand, enduring commitments to unity, solidarity, and integration. On the other, a growing wave of political diversions and realignments. From suspended memberships to the emergence of parallel alliances, Africa's regional organizations are facing some of the most significant challenges since their establishment. The coherence of regional blocs, once seen as engines of stability and collective ambition, is increasingly challenged by competing national agendas, institutional fatigue, and a shifting global order that fuels external influences on the continent's political choices. Mehdi Ibn Omar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me and an honor to moderate this first panel of APSACO. So the President asked us to shake and to bring the intensity to the session, so we'll do our best. And I think that navigating the issues of regional integration in Africa is one of the best topics to start with. So we'll have a classical panel with four distinguished speakers. So they will have 8 minutes of speaking for each. Then we'll have a time for interaction. In my brief introduction, I will say that in the recent years, our continent has seen its commitment to regional integration confronted with rising political and security challenges. Tensions and political withdrawals are testing the coherence of regional blocs. This panel will examine how these groups are adapting and what this reveals about the state of regionalism in Africa. We will focus cases of fragmentation, such as the rift between the Alliance of States, as we have 3 representatives from this region, and the ECOWAS, through the various perspectives of our speakers. And we will explore many other questions. So how can internal dissensions ultimately be reconciled with, while maintaining strategic relevance? And finally, can the regional blocs, on their traditional form, still engines of integration or stability, or mirroring the global geopolitical context? Are we witnessing an era of selective coalitions and ad hoc diplomacy? So before to start, I would like to ask the audience to take your application, as we have a first poll to start this session, because in geopolitics and politics, the perceptions are very important. So you will have one question which is on your screen. So which factor gives you the most hope for stronger regional cooperation in Africa's sub-regional landscape? And you have 4 proposals. So you have 30 seconds to 1 minute to answer. Yes. So this is dynamic, it changes. So this is a good point. The growing political will. And some speakers, I know, that will be happy to see these kinds of figures. Let me know when the poll is over. So this is the perception of our audience, and we won't make any more comment on this at the level of our panel. I ask you just to screenshot it, and you will see if this perception will change after this panel or not. So We are increased economic. Oh, the political will is decreasing. I think it's stabilized. So the fourth proposition about the economic growth and up, still moving, okay. The youth. Are there some people that are changing their minds maybe? That's why it's moving so much. Okay, we consider it as the economic growth may be one of the main factors to enhance this regional cooperation, and then the factor of youth, the engagement of youth. So thank you for all of you for your participation to this poll. With no further ado, let's open this floor to our panelists. And our first panelist is from Gambia, is Mr. Said Matijao. He's a co-founder and director of the Center of Research Policy Development, and he was also involved as observer in the Afrobarometer. So he's a wise, I would say, witness of this question of integration, also of perception. So, Mr. Satija, why regional integration is stalling? Is it only about political transition, governance, or to the structure of our African societies? The floor is yours for 8 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Sati.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, the Policy Center, for inviting me. This is the first time I'm in Morocco, and so far the food and the people have been really nice. And I've been really having a good time. And yes, to start with, let me start with the people. As you know, I work with Afrobarometer, and if you look at the recent surveys, especially from 2021, where it shows that in West Africa, Afrobarometer reports that roughly 6 in 10 Africans rate the regional organizations very highly. That is the SADC, the ECOWAS, these have been rated very highly. And in particular, a survey in 2021 showed that 73% of Burkinabés, 65% of Malians and Nigerian, and these countries saw ECOWAS, citizens saw ECOWAS political and economic influence as very positive. So this is to say that in West Africa, in particular, most countries, most citizens see ECOWAS in a very positive light, and this is also reflective in my own country, the Gambia, where we have experienced both the positive and currently one of the debates is the negative side of ECOWAS intervention, which is the continuous presence of ECOMIC, even though since after 2017 people wanted them to leave. So you can see that even though people trust ECOWAS, they want ECOWAS to engage and they want this institution, but of course there are certain norms, issues that are not translating well into the realities of the everyday citizens, and these are reasons why sometimes you see people having a different perspective about what the regional interventions are. I'll take Gambia again. In 2017, when they were intervening, almost everybody shouted and welcomed them. But right now, if you ask people, everybody wants ECOWAS to leave because they're arguing that they're overstaying. But this also shows that the positive image that has been given over the period is also fracturing, and this fracture is as a result of what we are currently witnessing in the region, especially with Mali, Burkina, and Niger, with the Alliance of Sahel States, where also citizens are looking at their realities and how ECOWAS has been looking into those issues. While citizens were talking about the insecurity that they were feeling, the challenges of the economic problems that they were feeling, what they saw in return from ECOWAS was more or less trying to impose sanctions on them, or even trying to use military, military might to stop the coup. But then people are also saying, why is it that the norm application of ECOWAS is not universal? Why is it that if coups carry out coups, then they are sanctioned, countries are punished, and citizens even themselves feel that, but when it is done by so-called democrats, they are treated differently. And we've seen the case of Nigeria, where their last election with Tinubu was very controversial. But immediately, what did ECOWAS do? They made Tinubu the chairman of ECOWAS. And some analysts are saying that these are some of the problems that the regional bloc is also being confronted with. So we've seen the departure of the Sahelian states as a deep rupture in the application of norms, but also in terms of the realities that citizens of these countries, like for instance, what the militaries are saying is that the way ECOWAS responded to their situation was very inhuman. Instead, they're talking about sanctions, which were mostly affecting the ordinary citizens and not the regime, which even the sanctions was intended to. So for me, there are quite a lot of things that I can look at, but also to show that while also the norms that we believe in within the sub-region, when you look at the protocol on democracy and good governance, I participated at one point where they brought us, all of us from West Africa, to start discussing about how to amend or to look at the protocol again. And so we spent like 2 days in Ghana debating as academics, civil society activists. But at the end of the day, this particular protocol got to the regional leaders. And what did they do with it? They just put it aside. So what the citizens are demanding is not reflective of what the leaders are also doing. And so those things become problematic. And right now the protocol is perhaps outdated, and there are a lot of issues that citizens want them to address. And so when ECOWAS is faced with these realities, in terms of my recommendations, our various studies also show that there's a huge gap between citizens and ECOWAS. And right now, ECOWAS is talking about ECOWAS of the people, 2063, ECOWAS of the people, 2050, but citizens are not seeing themselves. And so one of my first recommendations is that there's a need for ECOWAS to deepen citizens' engagement and transparency. Of course, we can have all these norms, we can have all these different policies, different engagements, and there's that belief within the citizens that ECOWAS is still useful, is still needed, but citizens are not aware of what ECOWAS does, what their mandates are, and so those things need to be deepened. And in all these countries, you have ECOWAS representatives. They need to be engaging with the public. They need to be more transparent in terms of some of their policies and also engagement. There's also the need for ECOWAS to apply governance rules consistently, and I think in the beginning I tried to mention this. If everybody agrees on a norm, and when people start seeing you favoring A and leaving B, it becomes like a subjective issue. They say like you're doing favoritism, and those are the issues that ECOWAS need to address. The protocol on democracy and good governance should be enforced impartially and across the board. But also, most importantly, right now what we are confronted with mostly is the problem with the Sahel, AES. And you have Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger leaving the ECOWAS. I think there needs to be that dialogue. And currently, what ECOWAS is doing, this open door policy where they're trying to have engagement with these countries, are very necessary and welcoming. And of course, we also seen that the continues. Now I can still travel in these countries with my ECOWAS passport. And so these are the issues that need to continue. They need to bring in these different countries. I know colleagues are from these countries will elaborate more on that. But there needs to be those engagement that has to be done within the region. But beyond that, ECOWAS needs to start looking at the issue of economic integration in particular, which is very critical. How do you build cross markets within these border zones instead of trying to shut down one country over the other? So in a nutshell, for me, I think the application of norms are problematic. In terms to answer your question, the implementation of norms are problematic, and this has to do with the fact that ECOWAS is not seen as very responsive to the needs of the people and the lack of citizens' engagement in the entire ECOWAS process. And until and unless we are able to balance these different dynamics, then ECOWAS will continue to face its problem, despite the fact that it used to be known as the most advanced regional bloc. But currently, what ECOWAS is experiencing is very problematic, and citizens are, disoriented. But still, ECOWAS has that support that it needs. So it just needs to build on these realities and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Setija. Yes, there is a necessity to renew this social contract. Thank you for stressing on this. And for the specific point of OS, to keep the dialogue, this is one of the way to give it away. Notre second intervenant est Monsieur Elio Sanchez.
Our second intervenant is Elio Sanchez. He was a legal counselor in his country, Cape Verde. So, is it about renegotiation of the social contract, or do we need to build trust, political trust? I know that it's a subject that is very important to you. The floor is yours for 8 minutes. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be among you today in this beautiful country, the Kingdom of Morocco, the Kingdom of His Majesty Mohammed VI. May God assist him. So the subject that we are debating is very important indeed, because we are here to brainstorm about our region, the ECOWAS, but also other regions of our dear continent. Now, regarding the ECOWAS region, my country is part of the ECOWAS region. I think that the question or the issue here is to understand that ECOWAS is, if ECOWAS is a regional organization or an integration organization or a cooperation organization. We need to understand the difference. This is a legal question, and we need to ask this question. Now, with that being said, to answer this question, we need to understand that an integration organization is an organization with different bodies having their own decisions and constraining decisions. For example, the European Union. When we are discussing, we can give examples of other organizations that were successful, like the European Union. European Union is an integration organization. Why? Because its bodies, like for example the European Parliament, the Justice Court, European Union Justice Court, or others, have their own independence, their own decisions. Why? Because states transferred some competences and some decisions to these organizations. In these organizations, we need to transfer the competences. In the European Union, this is what is done, and the decision of these bodies are constraining. Now, the question regarding the ECOWAS organization. So, is it the bodies of the ECOWAS, the Parliament, the Justice Court, and the Commission, do they have their own decisions, and can they do they have constraining decisions that they can impose on states? So ECOWAS is working to become an organization or an integration organization or not? Because the decision of its bodies are not constraining. They can't impose anything. For example, somebody with a legal framework or a lawyer, I worked in the ECOWAS court when there's a decision to be taken, for example, like, for example, a citizen asking the ECOWAS to make a decision. When the decision is made, what can the citizen do with this decision? When can it be executed? They can't. The citizen can't. Why? Because they can't oblige the state to respect the decision. So, in a legal point of view, we don't really have an integration organization. And I would like also to add that regarding its bodies, they don't really have important decisions like the one states have. The decisions made by its bodies are merely recommendations. This is a challenge. We need to give more responsibilities and more competency to ECOWAS bodies. We have intellectuals studying ECOWAS. And these experts and intellectuals believe that it is a cooperation organization only. ECOWAS needs to resolve its internal problem that is pertaining to security. Why not have an integration organization with different states that is not working, with institutions and bodies that are not working? How can you call yourself an organization? It is really unfortunate because we are part of the ECOWAS, but the reality is what it is. Some countries are fragmented and have authoritarian regimes, and this can't enable an integration as we wish it to be. The political problems are known to everyone. As my colleague mentioned, we have states that are not part of our organization anymore, like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, the Sahel countries or states, the 3 states. So what can we do to stabilize our region? I think that we need democracy in all the states of the region. This is a necessity. The values of democracy are universal values, as stipulated in the UN Charter, or Human Rights Charter. I think this is why we need to involve the African population and the African citizens too. Good governance, the fight against corruption, these are elements that we need to take into consideration and that the countries of the ECOWAS need to resolve. This is why the political will is very important. And our moderator talked about it. The political will is extremely necessary and extremely important. Without political will, we can't advance. Some countries, for example, here in Morocco, Morocco is a good example. It's a country that implemented a democratic regime, respecting human rights, respecting citizens' dignity, but also a country that trains its people, educates its people. I think that it is crucial to train the people. For a country to be successful, they need to educate. Nelson Mandela said it. He said that education is a pillar, is necessary for the future of Africa. Now, with that being said, I need to conclude. I don't want to take more time because people need to intervene, as other speakers need to intervene. So allow me to suggest 3 recommendations regarding the consolidation of the integration of ECOWAS. The first recommendation: a real political will for an efficient economical integration. We want an efficient economical integration with the involvement of all the citizens of the region. And they need to feel well in all the aspects, social, economical, and political. The second recommendation is that the state need to give some sovereignty to the regional organization. This is what I mentioned before. States are jealous. They want to keep their sovereignty. They don't want to involve ECOWAS. This can't be done. Without it, there can't be an integration. The experience in other parts of the world is a testimony of this. The bodies of the ECOWAS need to have constraining decisions, legal constraining decisions. In my opinion, if we respect these recommendations, these 3 elements, 3 points, and if we work towards the implementation of democracies in our countries, it is not easy. It is difficult. I was discussing with an expert this morning from Mali, because I asked him, brother, in Mali, I heard that elections will be held in 10 years or what? I don't understand this situation. And my brother explained it to me. He said that democracy itself is nothing. We need, first of all, to stabilize the country and create an environment, a good environment, and after maybe we will have transparent and free elections. So I think that to conclude, I think it is possible to have a complete integration, but we need to respect the rules. And if we respect these rules, this recommendation, I think that we will be able to achieve our objectives. Thank you. Democracy, norms, integration. Yes, it is difficult because everyone is talking about sovereignty. Sovereignty is very important to the African countries of the ECOWAS region. In Bamako, for example, there are some discussions. Maybe we need to discuss it more. The floor is yours, Mr. Thank you. I would like, first of all, to thank the Policy Center for having me in this APSACO 9th edition. I'm going to talk about the Confederation of Sahel States. It is a concept that is extremely important to understand the stakes in this region, because the Sahel region is today a confrontation, a conflict, and a competitive region, a region where many actors are playing, and everything is pertaining to the development of the economical world order. So we are witnessing a new world. It's a multipolar world today, with the emergence of China, Russia, India. This is an opportunity for the African countries, because these are new poles in the world, new axes. This is a civilizational, multipolar because the world today is going toward an important shift. And this haven't happened since the 16th century. We are witnessing the decline of the Western world. The Western world isn't what it was before. The second element of this shift is the technological change. Now, more than 4 centuries, there are new phenomena. And now we have AI, artificial intelligence, mechanical revolution, electrical revolution, computer revolution, and now we have the AI revolution. The third element of this shift is the institutional change. We are witnessing the decline of democratic systems. The fourth shift is the knowledge change. The system of universities is changing, is shifting. Like, for example, political science. It's not enough today to explain the phenomenon. Law, sociology, all these disciplines can't explain what is going on today in the world. And the last shift, and I think it's the most important, it's the shift of the power. The power is not in the North Atlantic anymore. It's going to the West Pacific. So what is going on today is pertaining to this shift. We are witnessing the emergence of new countries, new axes of power that are balancing the power with the Western world. So what is going on in the Sahel region is a civilizational shift too. So the Sahel states need to disrupt post-colonial paradigms, and they need to cut their links with the Western powers or the traditional Western powers. And to do so, we need to take into consideration the multipolarity that we are witnessing today. This multipolarity means that democracy, idealism are not perceived as references that can enable states to be autonomous. On the contrary, they are more and more dependent on the Western world. Hence, the necessity to disrupt this dependence, growing dependence, to rehabilitate our states. I call it the rehabilitation of civilizational autonomy. To value more and more our own civilizational referential. These societies, these countries have their own history. We have great empires in the different regions of Africa, and these populations
have put in place important civilizations, and they have to get all from this historical reference in order to put in place this confederation, which is currently on the process of being implemented. So this is, of course, by facing the indigenous development, which means that they have to rely on resources which are available at their level and which are considered to be important resources: recruitment, strategic partnership, and all the raw materials that are important for the regular functioning of these latter. But before even putting or highlighting the importance of selling such raw materials, we have to proceed to their transformation. So the main important principle is to proceed to transforming these raw materials before even exporting them, which leads us to think that today many companies are setting up their own factories, and mostly companies operating in refined raw materials and refinement, and this needs, of course, a certain consciousness to transform the raw materials before proceeding to exporting them. This being said, it's a multipolar civilization, which allows us to conduct a number of partnerships with other countries that do not have dominant representation, such as China, Russia, Morocco, and where we see all of these states and where all the confederations are trying to put in place partnerships with other states and many states at the same time, which allow them to regulate all the challenges that these countries are being confronted to, which is the case of Morocco. Morocco is intervening for the capacity building programs of the military. Many military, they're also helping Mali on the sector of intelligence, and of course the training here is helping to build the capacities of economic resources in these different states. So the multiplying effect of this civilization is not just something to do with not becoming rich, but it's something that should be conducted on a short run, and which will, throughout the process of the construction, in a bigger entity, because the success of such confederation depends on its broadening, which means that many countries right now are trying to knock many doors to try to integrate this confederation. The idea is that this confederation can substitute to the CDAO, which is currently nourishing itself and piloting all these projects from outside, and which is considered by the populations as a dominant aspect from the Occident. So the CDAO, or which currently is working on these projects, and when referring to the CDAO, we mean, so here we're talking about all the countries that are trying to knock the doors of these different confederations to integrate the confederation and move on towards an independent entity. Here we have a civilizational pole, which is constitution in Western Africa. And if we are able to get to point to constitute this pole, it will allow us, of course, into Africa to have a continent which will have its own place in the world. Thank you very much, Mr. Touré, for your intervention. Thank you very much for insisting on the fragmentation and the external impact that this one may have on regional integrations, but the philosophical question that will be in fact tackled in the debates. Can we think about reconstructing everything? Can we construct things when we are being rejected, or do we have to do it differently? When we talk about rejection, we are talking about the strong perception of this latter in Occidental countries, which is different from the one in Africa and Sahel countries.
And we are moving South Africa, and to enlarge the perspective on this integration is Mr. Stevens Mokpala. Mr. Stevens Mokpala, welcome again to the Policy Center. You held several local political positions in South Africa, but also within the South African development community. So you are a wise witness of these questions. So last year, there was an important election in South Africa. How the young generation of politicians like you, what is their perception of the integration of the SADC, which is somehow a successful experience? And what extent you can share with us and with the audience on these topics? Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Let me firstly thank my fellow panelists and also thank the King, His Excellency Mohammed VI, and as well as the Policy Center for inviting me and my organization to be at this prestigious event. It's my 5th time in Morocco, so I'm well vested in the Moroccans. Let me start my contribution in asking this thought-provoking thought to all of us in this room. How many of us in this room know the AU national anthem? Thank you very much. And how many have integrated the AU national anthem into our own national anthems? None. So this is a thought-provoking thought. If we talk about integration, we need to walk the talk because there is an AU national anthem that all 55 nations of the AU should be able to integrate into our own national anthem. That is the first point that I would want to make. I think when we now, and we are at a stage where when we talk about African solutions for African problems, this is where we are at. We need to make sure that the integration project becomes a success, because if we look at the geopolitical environment that we found ourselves in globally, it means Africans, we are on our own. And we need to make sure that when we talk integration, we mean what we say and we say what we mean. So the time of workshops, talk shops is gone. We need tangible and practical, implementable programs and projects that are integrated in our continent, in our regions. That is the fundamental, my point of departure in terms of the issue of regional integration. I come from a region of 16 countries, which is the SADC, one of the most long-standing integration projects in the African continent. What are our issues? Our issues, firstly, is the issues around democracy deficit. The fundamental question that you've asked Program Director in terms of, we had elections that happened in the past year or so, and some are still coming, but we still face a challenge in terms of, one, the youth apathy in terms of participation in those elections, because of the young people feel that the system does not respond to their own needs. And yet, that is why they are looking for alternatives in terms of the democracy. Linked to the democracy deficit is the issue of the liberation movements or liberation organizations. That doesn't want to transfer power because they no longer have the vision for the future. They want to trap us into the ideological past. And I think if we look geopolitically around the world, there is no longer alignment in terms of ideology. There is alignment in terms of what the vision is and how to solve the current economic, social issues in our respective countries. So we need to make sure that we inculcate the spirit of democracy into the young people. We need to ensure that we get rid of liberation movements because they are no longer forward-thinking. We have some pockets of success in terms of democracy. It's not all doom and gloom. The latest that we have seen was in Botswana, where the transfer of power from a liberation party to a new modern political party happened, which is a good success. For young people, it was a step in the back to say, perhaps this is the step in the right direction that can resuscitate the democracy deficit that we are talking about. The second one was in Zambia as well, where the transfer of power did happen peacefully in terms of from a transition of liberation movement to a new generation political party. You have Malawi as well, the same happened. We still got problematic issues. The DRC, it's an elephant in the room because the situation there in terms of the peace and security, it still remains a problem not only for the SADC, but for our continent and by extension for the global community. We had a disturbing electoral issue in Mozambique, which still persists to be a problem in terms of the questions around the electoral outcomes, the questions around the electoral process that happened there. Zimbabwe remains an Achilles heel. It remains a problem that always persists. We, in the SADC region, for the second time, I would say, we have a woman president. In Namibia, the first one is in Tanzania because of the transition of the death of the former president, and a woman president came in, and now elected duly from the popular vote was in Namibia. So I'm bringing you this perspective for you to understand the democracy that we are talking about in terms of youth participation, in terms of women participation, in terms of the general psyche around how we see democracy going. So there are pockets of success and there are extreme pockets of challenges that we face within the SADC region. Economically wise, We are still trying to integrate ourselves, but our economies are not yet integrated. We are still reliant on our old traditional way of doing business. And I think we need diversification of our economy so that we can make sure that it transcends and build into the new borders. My brother here was talking about the issue of AI. That is the digitalization. It's a new way of doing business, and we are still doing business in the old way. And part of the challenges and the problem is because of the protocols that regulate our economic integration are still a challenge. We are still using our old colonial way of doing business around each other. And one fundamental question that became the elephant in the room is the issue of how do we translate the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to be meaningful? At this point in time, it is just happening between heads of states. The ACFTA hasn't yet came to us as civilians because of we are the implementers of ACFTA. If we have to rely on our governments to trade amongst each other, bilateral commissions can happen. Papers can be signed between countries, but in the main, who are the practitioners? The practitioners is the civil society. It is us, it is the business people who need to ensure that there is people-to-people interaction, there is service, movement of goods and services, and that is not happening. So the ACFTA come at the advent where there is a need for greater regional integration, because of that is where we need to start. So when we speak of regional integration, we need to make sure that firstly, politically we are aligned. Secondly, we need to ensure that economically we are aligned. And thirdly, the most important, because of it's about the people, that the people have got alignment. So as we stand so far, the 16 nations bloc, there is a move to try and integrate. By the way, the solution for Africa rests within our regional economies. If we can get SADC working, if we can get East Africa Community working, if we can get ECOWAS working, if we can get the Central African working, we will be on a trajectory and get the North Africa by extension also functioning. Then it will make it easier for the AU to coordinate this thing. One thing that I always find disturbing is that we sign most of these protocols amongst ourselves, but the challenge is the domestication of those. And if a protocol cannot be domesticated and put into indigenous law of our countries, then it's a futile exercise. It's not even worth the paper it is written on. So we need to move beyond having protocols and go into the implementation. For example, in SADC, we've got this benchmark protocol about elections. It sets out clear indicators of how the elections should be conducted from the pre to the post to during the elections. But do we follow that to the latter? Because of our problem in the SADC region is around the democracy deficit. We seem to do our democracy as a tick box exercise. Yeah, elections happens in 5 years. But we don't look at the process of that electoral process and what the impact it is, and whether do we have a free and fair and transparent elections. In fact, we found very nice words of how to define post-electoral issues, to say it was a good election. So, fundamentally, why? Because we are not domesticating these protocols. If we domesticate these protocols, it will make it easier for the region to be able to intervene. Because if the region fails to intervene within the prescripts of what the protocol agreed, because of most of the countries do not put them into their indigenous law, then it creates that tension between an indigenous law and the regional law. And then it goes to this question of national sovereignty. Because of my argument is to say national sovereignty doesn't trump the rights of individual. That is where the responsibility to protect comes in from the region. And if the region cannot take that responsibility to protect in the interest of the civilians, then why do you have a region? It is not for us to gather the gentleman's club. It's about to make sure that the civilians that we claim we represent are protected. So that is the fundamental issue that we have within the SADC region. We have the executive authority in terms of the heads of states and government. We have what we call a parliamentary forum. It is not so much structured as the one of the East Africa. East Africa have got EALA, the East Africa Legislative Authority. It's well integrated. It's well within the statutes of all of those regional countries. But in the SADC, because of fundamentally the problem of this thing called national sovereignty and wanting to be able to hold on to power, we are failing to have a representative parliament that has got teeth. I know that the bigger problem we are having here is the Pan-African Parliament, which doesn't have teeth. Because of the Pan-African Parliament does nothing. It's just situated there in Midrand, and it's just for the MPs to fly in and out and do shopping in Sandton.
Stevens,
So
1 minute, please.
it's the same as, well, I wanted to put a disclaimer that I'm a politician, so once you give me a mic, I can go on. But in closing, moderator, I would just want to say the 3 recommendations that we would want. One is the issue of the political will. We need to have leaders and ethical leaders who can be able to make a difference and mean what they mean and say what they mean. Secondly, it is the issue of dealing with the democracy deficit. We need to make sure that we strengthen the democracy. It doesn't become a thick box exercise, but it becomes the true representative of the people and the will of the people. The third one, which is important, is the domestication. Because of unless we make these protocols that we have regionally and continentally to be binding on individual states, then we will be going nowhere slowly. So domestication of the protocols, either AU or regionally, needs to be implemented and domesticated within our own indigenous countries. I think then we will see the movement in terms of regional integration. Regional integration, it is the future, it is needed. That is what we have. We cannot exist as countries on our own, as islands. We need to collaborate and cooperate and make sure that we drive the regional agenda forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stevens, for addressing this perspective from the SADC, and we see that there are similarities, even if the study cases from ECOWAS and SADC are very different, but there are similarities in challenges, and you have identified them: that sovereignty, regional economic integration, and specificity for SADC also to the Front Liberation Party to renew the narrative, to renew how they speak to citizens and how they build they contract with citizens. So thank you to all for the speakers. It was a rich and deep analytical, whether it was in addressing the état des lieux of this question or in your analytics, in your data. Thank you very much for this rich panel. I will open now the floor to the audience. Nous allons commencer la question.
Now we'll be moving on to the Q&A session.
So that I can catch, I will be as fair as possible I see in the second row, au deuxième rang, il y avait un monsieur au deuxième rang. Non. Alors, monsieur Bassou, après monsieur Melon. Monsieur Bassou, allez-y. And then, see, don't worry.
Merci. Merci, c'est Mehdi Ben Omar. Et merci à nos panélistes qui nous ont éclairés donc, sur ces questions d'intégration, de communautés régionales. En fait, j'ai deux questions. La première est à M. Sanchez qui a vraiment traité de cette question d'intégration. Nous savons que, enfin, comme les individus, les États aussi, s'allient, s'unissent, créent des cadres d'intégration pour deux raisons. Soit qu'ils ont des intérêts à défendre, donc des buts à atteindre, soit parce qu'ils ont des menaces à repousser. Ma question est-ce que les cadres actuels d'intégration régionale en Afrique répondent à ces besoins? Est-ce que les États en Afrique de l'Ouest, à la SADC, est-ce qu'ils font face aux mêmes menaces? Est-ce qu'ils ont la même perception des menaces? Est-ce qu'ils défendent les mêmes intérêts? Est-ce qu'ils ont la même conception de leurs intérêts? Ça, c'est ma première question. La deuxième est pour M. Stevens, Mokalpa. Il a mis le doigt sur quelque chose de très important. C'est que dans certains États africains, jusqu'à présent, donc là est notre voisin, des mouvements de libération qui étaient là dans les années 60 continuent de saturer le paysage politique et le paysage du développement et à mettre la main sur les États. Alors que nous sommes à 60 ans maintenant des dates des indépendances, d'autres générations sont venues, des générations qui n'ont pas connu ni l'idée de libération ni rien. Est-ce qu'il n'est pas temps de laisser ces générations s'occuper de l'Afrique, s'occuper du développement de l'Afrique? Les anciennes générations se sont occupées de la libération. Les générations actuelles doivent avoir un peu la main. Or, ce que nous remarquons, c'est que certains mouvements de libération continuent toujours à mettre la main sur la politique de leur pays, alors que peut-être leur mission, l'objet de leur existence, je crois qu'il est caduc, il est terminé, leur mission est déjà réalisée. Merci.
Merci, M. Bassou. M. Melon, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you so much. I'll switch to English if that's okay. Jerome Mellon from the United Nations headquarters. Thank you so much for all the speakers. Maybe I'll tap into some of the recommendations of the two last speakers. There was a strong emphasis on fostering or enhancing political will. And I think that this is very much at the core of addressing governance deficits, or as you said, democratic deficits. But there's always an issue with political will, and my expertise is mostly in West Africa, and including in the Sahel. How would you frame political will so that it doesn't equate political elite will? Are we talking about regime will, or are we talking about societal will? That notion or that distinction is quite important, because the vision that will emerge from that will, the ownership of that vision will be different depending on who you're asking and whether it's organically linked into the broader population or just the political regime of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame? Monsieur Ben Moussa après.
Thank you so much. Yasmin Hisnawi, Professor of Political Science.
My name is Yasmin
in Kuwait. My questions is directed, thank you first of all for this very insightful panel. My question goes to Mr. Toure. So I want just to zoom back a little bit on these countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, that formed this Alliance of the Sahel States. So how is that AES coming along? Is it adequately funded? And is it robust enough to counter and tackle the collective security in the region? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, this has been like a really big detour in the politics of the regions in the 21st century. So how is this alliance shaping up? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Monsieur. Premier rang, s'il vous plaît.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be as a part of this conference. You have some guest speakers who are English speakers and another one French speakers. So I will switch to French if you are okay.
I just have a remark to make, or maybe a comment and a question as well. The first one is regarding in this country or in our lands, we recognize 54 African countries or African states and not 55. I wanted to identify this and to consider that the Sahara region is a Moroccan territory. This has been treated exclusively with the United Nations and not just the African Union, and it was important for me to be specific about this. My question is about the African continent, and I remember the declaration of the previous African president, French president, who considered that Africa is not part of the history. I don't know what happened to this president finally, but my question is to do with the fact that we are not yet a continent which is dominant at the international geostrategy for many big reasons. The first one is that we have many internal conflicts between different African countries, and we don't know how to manage our conflicts. However, conflicts are natural and can happen between different states, and sometimes even within the same states, between regions, tribes, and ethnic groups. Our problem is that we don't have we didn't understand, or we couldn't understand, that the only way to manage such conflicts is to have a good democratic system. The second reason for our delay in our emergence for this geostrategy is that the trade in Africa constitutes less than 11% between African countries.
So the question is how, beyond the integration issues, how could we accept to implement a process or an institution that could be the African Union, where we could think of a power that would, through force legitimacy, to impose democracy and orient and reorient our economies inside the continent, to finally consider that the African continent is not a continent, but the biggest island globally, where economy will be focusing more and more on the internal flows. So we'll go to the panel for the first round of answers, and we'll get 4 other questions. Who would like to start? You have heard many comments, many questions. Mr. Sanchez, Mr. Bassou. Someone who would like to reply?
2-3 minutes so that we can have another series of questions. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you for the questions that have come from the floor. Sir, you've spoken about the AU. The AU is quite a very interesting project because of sometimes it does things that are not for the interest of us as the people of Africa. We are calling for the reform of the United Nations and the United Security Council, but one reform that we need is the AU. We need to make the AU to be responsive to us as the citizens. We all know that they would always want to refer to us being 55 countries, but we know in reality we have 54 countries in the African continent. So that must be made clear, that the continent consists of 54 countries. Sir, you've made a very good question in terms of the issue of the political will. What do we mean when we talk of the political will? For me, the answer would be both the regime and as well as the people. Remember, the regime gets a mandate from the people. So we, the people, needs to ensure that we direct what our regimes do. I do understand the limitations that once you have voted, you have given your vote to a regime that must implement. I would say the reform that I would call for in terms of our democracy deficit is to say our elections need to be a referendum. We need to say here are the 5 issues in our country that are non-negotiable. And once a regime gets into power, responds only to those 5. Then that is when the political will happen. Otherwise, we're just giving a blank check to the political elite. So my political will is to say we as the citizens need to take responsibility. And secondly, we need to hold the regime accountable. That's what the political will is.
Thank you, Stevens. Monsieur Sanchez?
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to answer the question of Mr. Omar, I don't know, he's not here. He was asking a question about states that are part of ECOWAS. Do they have the same interests, the same visions of integration inside this region? My answer is yes, because the 15 states today, 12 with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso withdrawing. But the 15 countries who have signed the revised Treaty of Abuja, they showed their will, clear and will for a regional integration. So from a legal standpoint, it's clear because all those states signed and ratified the revised Treaty of Abuja. The question now is about the political will. We always bounce back to it. How could we achieve the integration objective? Sometimes I say, we all know the diagnosis of Africa. So we know it's like a person who is sick. We have diagnosed, we know what is the treatment, and we just need to start implementing it or taking the medication. It's clear. For the second question, our friend from Morocco asked if we should or must impose democracy inside our African states, and particularly to get to an integration. I don't think that democracy is imposed. Democracy is a universal value. States, they have to incorporate, they have to abide by democracy. We have to create basics and structures for democratic states. This is my answer. Thank you. Mr. Torre. Thank you. I will bounce back to the question of about the democratic deficit that was asked. For the 3 Sahel states, the idea is to come out of this democratic hypocrisy or let's call it imposter, to really highlight the African cultural and historical links and references. We have many references in terms of management and justice that our societies own, and what those 3 states are now experiencing. You know, recently, Mali just established the traditional judges, just established this structure. So the traditional judges are now recognized by the formal and official justice. We have as well re-established the Baruamru, the national tribunals or courts or arenas to debate around the decisions made. So those are elements that are related to our historical, cultural references and showing to the world that it's not the Western democracy, the liberal democracy that is now declining and is being jeopardized, and the states are looking for other alternatives, looking for references in their own histories. So we have to make it ours, and we have as well to domesticate it, if so to speak. The second element is the collective security inside the Sahel States Alliance. We are witnessing a change of paradigm that was triggered and stipulating that if we don't want to be dominated, if we stay weak, we will always be dominated by the others. So the three states engaged in a process of security capacity building by equipping themselves with defense and security equipment, and we are advancing swiftly on that. We have strategic partnerships with Russia and other countries to strengthen the states, because if we are still weak and not strong, we will always be dominated. The challenge is fighting against poverty and hunger goes through reinforcing security mechanisms, though. The three states joined their forces. The three armies are now gathered, federated, to fight against the armed and terrorist groups that are destabilizing our states. So our joint force has given extraordinary results by demolishing the terrorist bases. So, all in all, the forces have the capacity to solve those issues, but we still need time, and it's all about time. Thank you. Colonel.
Over time. Monsieur, derrière, and then after here. Oh. Thank you. S'il y a autant de questions, c'est que cela a suscité.
So if we have many questions, meaning that the panel was very interesting. Thank you, Mr. Mahdi. Thank you, panelists. I address a question. Well, it's going to be a direct one. The question of multi-belonging, the multi-belonging of countries to different regional structures. When we see some countries, without citing names, they belong to 4 economic communities. And we have tens of them that belong to 3 and others belong to 2. And for me, it's the best way not to belong to anyone. Seeing the necessary contributions, don't you think that it is now necessary to rectify this abnormal question and belong to one regional economic community? It's an open question to all the panelists, anyone who would like to take it. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you. I'd like to thank the different panelists. Mr. Touré raised a question related to the civilizational autonomy. This really attracted my attention because now the question is, don't you think that throws us back to a kind of nationalism or what we could call a identity decrease? If I belong to one country where 2 politicians politically oppose, but I agree on the fact that we have to engage in what Senghor calls the universal civilization and Sheikh Abu Diop, who was an opponent who invited us before 50 years to really dig in the human common heritage to avoid this exacerbated nationalism and identity decrease as we see it in the world, that could lead to bad strategies and that makes us see the West as an ally we should get rid of, and the Middle East or the East in general as an acceptable candidate. He gave the example of Russia and China, who have less ideological problems. While waiting for answers, don't we have to pay attention of those ideas, of those alliances that want to substitute to the traditional alliances? Shouldn't we really doubt about those Eastern alliances? Thank you for your question. I come on this side. Yes, didn't forget you, sir. Thank you. I'd like, as we are going to break in a while, I wanted to put a dynamite or mine in the question. So democracy, everybody talked about. We have seen it in the European form. So Europe had wars for centuries and centuries to put Italians in Italy, French in France, Germans in Germany, whereas African countries, most of them are multi-ethnical, multi-religious. So the way of managing those communities cannot be based on the democratic system that would keep minorities in difficult situations. That is what Mr. Toure has just said, is try to dig in our history to find consensus solutions would be preferable. So let's really dynamite, yes, and it would we would come up with something. Yes, ma'am, your question.
And my name is Teresa from the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center in Ghana. My question is to Mr. Stevens and also to any of the panelists. In his presentation, he mentioned that the young people do not feel favored when it comes to democracy. So my question is, could he please make one recommendation about how youth can be involved in democracy or the role that they can play? Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for your question. The very last one, I'm sorry, this one, madam.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask my question, which is going to be for Mr. Stevens Mokalpa. It's regarding the African Union, because you talked about like the political will inside the organization, how we need this political will coming from the society. But like, how can you jump from the states to the civil society? Because the African Union, with its 54 member states, it's highly political. Like, for instance, like within the Peace and Security Council meetings or within the summit, it's the heads of states that takes the decisions. It's the heads of states who elaborate different protocols and etc. And then also there is, when we have to take a major decision, the member states, they refuse to do so because they don't want to set a precedent, because in the future that could be them. So, I mean, how can we do this political will? And then like one last thing is that like following the last report of Paul Kagame that lead to the latest reforms in the African Union, many have invited to revise the protocol that established the Peace and Security Council. But like now there is a fear, and everyone says if we're going to give this opportunity, a lot of member states, they're going to vote to take a step backward instead of a step forward. So can you please explain me how can we have this political will, because it looks a bit like not realistic. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So I will ask the speakers, so you have 2 minutes each of you. We have to be sensitive because I have already a red card from the organization. So thank you very much. Who wants to start? Stevens? Who wants to start? Mr. Toure? Mr. Toure, allez-y le premier. OK, allez-y.
Thank you I'll try to answer the question about the risk, identity risk related to this civilizational autonomy. Right. There are isolation risks and identity risks or retreat. But the civilizational autonomy is not to be introvert. It's to open up, actually. It's based on building partnerships, establishing alliances with other countries. This is what allows to strengthen the civilizational autonomy. We have first to rely on historical, cultural references, tradition ones, to find a way to solve or surmount the challenges of our societies, because societies work based on their cultures, on their diverse belongings. The civilizational autonomy we're talking about allows us to call for all those historical references, the Islamic one, not in the religious way, but the political and moral and ethical perspective, which will allow our societies to get to the civilizational autonomy. It's a good concept, but there are some risks related to the identity retreat and isolation. I think that the three states have the good perception that those risks could be limited, and instead of identitarian closure, open up to other powers. As I said, China, Russia, Morocco, that today constitute allies to help those states get stronger. Because if we're not strong, if we're still dominated by others, the state will stay quo. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Wow, a lot of questions that I've jotted down and I have to sort them. Allow me to talk about youth and politics. The question raised by one of the participants. I think that the African youth are deceived, are upset of politicians and politics. It's very much remarked and noticed even in countries considering democratic. I give an example of my country, Cabo Verde. In Cabo Verde, during elections, most of the disinterest comes from youth, because youth consider that their issues, their concerns are not a priority of the politician. This is as well a situation that we all witness and live in African continent. Youth are asking for job opportunities, well remunerated, decent, and the politician, unfortunately, do not meet that need. Subsequently, we have migration, youth migration, that we know in, well, young African migrants leaving behind their continent to Europe, adventures in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, and we all know the results. We have to rebuild, reestablish trust, show them that politics is noble, and politics does not mean corruption, and that we don't do it for private gain, but politics are done to serve the community. This is why in our continent we have to talk about this. And I'm sure if we apply this, we will have new leadership, African leadership. Actually, we now, some youth are now leading in our countries. We talk about the Traoré, President Traoré, who has become president and whose speech is very positive vis-à-vis his country, vis-à-vis Africa, and vis-à-vis the world. So the narrative or the speech we need to spread amongst the youth is to show them that politics are meant to serve others and not to serve the self.
To respond maybe generally to some of the issues, and one of those was the imposition of democracy and reorienting our economies. I think the problem that we are having in ECOWAS in particular is the problem of imposition. Especially when we see what happened in the Alliance of the Sahel States. While they were addressing some of their major concerns, what ECOWAS was trying to do was to impose certain democratic norms that they feel was not the real issues to address at that position. So I think for me the major issue is how do we beyond this democratic rhetoric, imposing democracy, how do we look inward? And I think that's one of the problems that we have not been able to do effectively in this continent, is to look inward, to see what works for our peoples, what works for the youths, what works for the women, and to see how to address those issues. Without those things, we just come and, replicate these very rhetorics of democracy and all those. Of course, most people agree on that, but it is not delivering the goods, it's not delivering the economics that the young people need, it's not creating the fair space for the women, and those are the things that we need to need to address. And for me, I also think this regional bloc, somebody was talking about the multi-belonging and all those different issues. There is this issue of complementarity and, where we see that these regional blocs and the AU need to work together to see that some of the issues that are discussed at the regional level are also translated through the RECs, but also down to the state. But then the problem we have with all these regional organizations is the problem of the head of state. And until and unless we address those issues and bring this regional bloc closer to the people, then we'll continue to have the same meetings, the same issues, the same discussions, and the people will not get the benefit of these organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Said. And the 2 last minutes for Stevens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. For me, it's just 2 issues. One, I want to unequivocally say this. One is to say, I recognize the Moroccan Sahara in the fact that says, I support the autonomy proposal of the Moroccan government. As put in the AU and the United Nations. I think it's a constructive way forward. Secondly, I would want to recognize what the Moroccan government is doing in the Sahara region in terms of economic development and infrastructure development. I would say to the king, keep up the good work you are doing there. Now, let us come to the question about youth. There is always this saying about the youth. Nothing about us without us. So integrate us into the political system. That is why in my presentation I was saying the issue is about the liberation movement. And I think the sir here who spoke about the new generation leadership sums it quite well. That is what we need. The new generation leadership must come organically from those organizations. If the liberation movement don't give us the space within their political organizations, let us create our own. It's as simple as that. I don't subscribe to the issue of coup. I don't like coups, because of that is an undemocratic way of taking government. We need to take government in a democratic way. So we don't need soldiers, we need thinkers and visionaries. That is what the future of Africa lies on. Secondly, it is the issue around the issue of the AU, the peace and security political will. And it's a good question because Morocco and South Africa, we are heavily invested in the AU peace and security peacekeeping missions. So it's a fundamental question that we are asking because we need to get return on investment. Why are we investing so much in the peace and security and conflict resolution, and yet it persists to happen in Africa? So yes, part of the reform of the United Nations Security Council starts with the reform of the AU Peace and Security Council. Let's start from home first and go to the United Nations. So we need to make sure that we open up the space for the Security Council within the AU, and it is responsive to the civic organizations. We've got Agenda 2063. 2063 is approaching very fast, and those aspirations, we are still very far into achieving them. So my take would be to say, let us ensure that civil society gets to participate into the AU architecture rather than making it bureaucratic with the heads of states, heads of government, which is the same thing but a different context. Let us make sure that the civic society forms part of the AU architecture.
Thank you, Stevens. And it is the ending point of our panel, and I think we can applaud warmly our panelists for their contribution. Thank you very much indeed. Je sais qu'il y a eu beaucoup de questions, mais
I know that there were many questions, but during the break, you could interact with them. So you could chit-chat during the breaks if you have some questions. Thank you for your attention and participation. Thank you very much.